Well, welcome and thank you so much for joining us for this panel discussion hosted by Women Banding Together, or WBT. I'm Jenny Allen, one of the co-founders of WBT. I'm a Juilliard faculty member, artistic director emerita of the Philadelphia Wind Symphony, and a retired Army band conductor. I'm joined by the three co-founders. Jenny Neff is Associate Professor of Music Education and Director of the MM and Summer Music Studies at University of the Arts in Philadelphia. She's also an active presenter and guest conductor. Lori Schwartz Reichl is an author, educator, and consultant, and the founder of MakingKeyChanges.com, and she's also an active clinician, guest conductor, and presenter. And then Laura Johnson is the assistant conductor for the Bay Youth Wind Symphony and will be a band director in the Chesapeake School District this fall. Women Banding Together was organized to support women band directors, and I'd just like to tell you a little bit about our mission. We cultivate mentoring relationships for women band directors at all levels. We guide and connect directors who seek support. We create a platform to explore issues of women band directors. And we provide advice and guidance for anyone who wants to mentor women band directors. This is our fourth panel discussion since our founding in May. We're excited to welcome several guest panelists today who Lori will introduce in a few minutes. So Lori, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Thank you, Jenny. Welcome, everyone. Today's event is a follow-up to our July panel discussion that was entitled Reflecting on Our Classrooms and Communities Through the Lens of Black Lives Matter, where we had the distinct pleasure to hear from 4 outstanding educators and leaders in our educational profession. These panel guests included Dr. Wesley Broadnex, Associate Professor and Director of Bands at the University of Northern Colorado, Damian Kyle Crutcher, CEO of Crescendo Detroit and conductor of numerous community and youth ensembles, Anoa Green, coordinator of Wind Studies at Baltimore School for the Arts, and Shamika Nash, Fine Arts Department Chair at Morgan Park High School in Chicago. If you missed it, a recording of that panel discussion from July is in our Facebook page for Women Banding Together. Today's event is a follow-up to that discussion, as we wanted to hear the student voice and parent perspective too through the lens of Black Lives Matter. As the heartbeat of our communities, how do students and parents feel we, the educators, and specifically music teachers or band directors, can be more aware and responsive to their needs and create a more positive and inclusive learning environment? Today, we will hear from 3 students at all levels of education and 3 parents. As Women Banding Together organized this event, it caused me to reflect on my teaching experience of transferring from a predominantly white rural school in Pennsylvania to teaching in 2 Title I schools in Maryland with diverse demographics of predominantly Black and African American students. Some of my most treasured teaching moments occurred in this richness of culture, and I was motivated to reflect on my teaching by enhancing my limitations. For me, and like last month's panelists encouraged us to do so, while teaching a diverse population of students, I attempted to treat all students with kindness and love. I attempted to build relationships with each student and their families by embracing their uniquenesses, and I set and maintained equally high expectations for all students and attempted to continue that communication and these expectations with the students' families. I learned to focus on the educational philosophy of providing both windows and mirrors in the classrooms for students to be given the opportunity to see a reflection of themselves as in a mirror, and to include a reflection of, and to see in other cultures as through a window, to include a reflection of inclusion and diversity in role models, literature, music, backgrounds, interests, styles of learning, and so forth. It was as simple as looking in the mirror and asking myself this question: mirror, mirror on the wall, am I providing opportunities reflecting all? That was difficult to reflect upon when I realized I hadn't been doing that all too well at times. How to do so and to seek the resources to ensure these reflections were occurring for all students in my presence. I am continuing to learn, understand, and seek ways to enhance diversity in aspects of my life, and specifically in my teaching through social justice. Today, I, along with my Women Banding Together co-founders, hope we all continue to learn from our panelists as they will share their experience and offer suggestions to us. Please help me welcome our panelists for today. They include Jadyn Howard, high school student from Maryland. Jadyn, you want to give us a wave?
Hi.
Hi. Tia Mason Howard, parent advocate and communications executive from Maryland. There's Tia. Adrian B. Sims, undergraduate student in music education and composition at the University of Maryland, and he's also a composer for the FJH Music Company. Give us a wave, Adrian. Braeden Talley, middle school student from Ohio. Hey, Braeden, give us a wave. Okay. Emily Talley, parent and interim assistant director of athletic bands at Ohio University. There she is. And Dr. Will Talley, parent and director of bands at Ohio University. Okay. We welcome them all. We are in for an emotional and enlightening discussion today. We will begin with prepared questions asked from each of the Women Banding Together co-founders. And at the end, as Ginny mentioned, we will open up the discussion to questions from anyone. You can feel free to go ahead and type your questions into the comments section to hopefully be asked during the Q&A portion. I will now pass the baton to Jenny to ask our first question to our remarkable panelists.
Thanks so much, Lori. The first question is going to go to Tia, and that is, how can we as music educators allow equal access to music education for all students within the classroom and performance space?
Well, I think I'm in a classroom environment. I understand that educators have a challenge, particularly when you have so many students in one room. And sometimes, particularly in a music setting, when you have different sections, some students can get lost. You have some who are more introverted, some who are very outgoing and leaders, but I really encourage educators to kind of tap those who tend to be quiet to give them some leadership opportunities. You know, there's also tons of extracurricular events. So having two daughters who play an instrument, they have participated in solo ensembles, county and state level, GT band, honors band, etc. And I've always noticed it's always the same faces. So I always question if teachers tend to only select the same people over and over again. And those same faces typically aren't people of color. So in many cases, my daughters, along with a few others that we've seen time and time again, are the same ones. But when I look at their school and their classroom, their demographics are much more diverse. So I think there's an opportunity to leverage the talent that may already be there. And then for inclusion, also to seek student input. They have a lot of great ideas, so just kind of reaching out to help build buy-in and also expose them to different kind of music genres, not beyond the classical traditions that we would often see during concert band and even during football season when we had one, pre-pandemic during marching band season. So kind of just open it up for their input because you might have more engaging performances for your audiences.
Great, thanks so much. Those are really valuable insights. I'm going to pass it over to Ginny for the next question. And I think you need to unmute.
Thank you. This question is for Emily and Will. What can we do as music educators to represent the history of our community and its culture within our classrooms and performance spaces?
I think it's extremely important that you know the history of the school where you're at, the community, not just the school, but the community where you are. One of the examples I would use is Will and I both taught in Asheville, North Carolina for a good period of time at Asheville High School. And the history of that school is one of a lot of I don't know, hard times. I'll just say that. in the 60s, it used to be two different schools. Stevens-Lee was the predominantly Black school, and Lee-Edwards was the predominantly white school. And when they merged in the 60s, there was a lot of riots that happened, a lot of pushback because they didn't want to integrate the schools. And so, you know, one of the things we saw was the Stevens-Lee had the HBCU type style band, whereas Lee-Edwards had the typical classic corps style kind of marching band. And so for a very long time, and I think still currently today, the Stevens-Lee community and the members who went to that school and were part of that band really felt like they lost their band program when the schools integrated, because they became a mostly corps style band from that point forward. And I think that as a community member and an educator, that we have a responsibility to recognize their history and to honor that history. And one of the things that we try to do, I had a parent who went to North Carolina A&T, so I asked that parent to bring a couple people that he knew, and he ended up bringing, I don't know, 20 of his alumni friends, and they came in and taught our students a show, but in HBCU style. And it was a great experience for our kids. They got to learn a different style of marching, different style of music. There were a lot of traditions that they enjoyed so much that they wanted to carry into what they did on a normal basis, like how they came into the stadium. And for an HBCU style band, everything that they do is part of their performance. From the moment they step out of the door, it is all performance. And it is incredibly high energy, and it is incredibly demanding athletically too. It takes a lot of work. But how they proceeded into the stadium, the students absolutely love that. And so we were able to continue on with that tradition. There's no reason that we can't pay homage and tribute to the band that existed before the schools integrated. And I think it's really important that we recognize that, because it was such a huge part of our community, and they really felt a great loss from that. So you want to add anything?
Yeah, just briefly from a cultural standpoint, our job as band directors can be quite difficult because there's so much great music, especially that for band, that fits one particular mold. And so when we're programming, and even here now for me at the college level, I have to make a multicultural programming approach a priority for our programs. And so we have to think about that as well as we decide what we're going to play. And we have to find great music that represents, you know, that's the great thing about Asheville, is a melting pot. So we have students from all over the world, really, that we're teaching and engaging with. And I think it's important that we include all of those students in our approach to the music that we perform.
That's great. A little bit of a follow-up, Will, with that. Do you have any advice for others who are seeking to really do some multicultural programming?
Yeah, what I would say, you know, what I have to do now is, actually have to scour the internet a little bit. You know, there are some resources available that feature women composers and minority composers. So if you look, and of course we have one on the panel today, but if you do a little bit of homework, then you can find those composers, and you still have to look through that music, because I think we have an obligation to also perform quality music, but making a multicultural approach a priority for our programming as well. So we just have to do a little bit of homework outside of kind of the standard canon that we grew up with.
Yeah, thank you. Emily, I love that story about how you brought that marching style to everyone in the school. And I think it would be so cool if I were in school or high school or college right now, I would want to try something like that. And you're right, it's a very athletic type of marching. You really have to be in shape for it. So I hope that other people will try that as well after hearing you speak about that. Thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to Laura now for our next question.
Thank you so much. This question is for Adrian, and the question is, how important is it for students to have access to someone who looks like them to serve as a role model for success?
I think it's extremely important that kids have someone that looks like them in a position a position of leadership. And it really brings us to, how can students be expected to look at a leadership role and be like, how can I, or why would they even think to do that if they can't see themselves in that position? So I think it's extremely important that students are able to see something that resembles them in a position of leadership. And how do we do that in a music classroom? Well, you yourself may not, it's impossible to look like every single kid in your classroom. So you can't be that person for everybody. But we, especially in the music community, it's really great that we have so many people that are enthusiastic about working with kids and working with other people. And there's plenty of guest conductors and composers that would love to come into your classroom and work with your kids. And it's really, people get scared about this. People are like, oh, what if they say no? 9 times out of 10, people are just really, really happy to come into your classroom, and they're just happy to work with people and work with kids. And so just sending an email is or a message or whatever, and 9 times out of 10 they'll say yes. So I really, really encourage that. And it's not just about the subject, it's about the music, and it's about the experience that the kids are having in the classroom too. We get so focused on what we're teaching, we get focused on we're teaching I'm teaching notes today, I'm teaching rhythms today, but really we're teaching people, we're teaching children, we're teaching people how to become better people, but the way that we're doing it is through music. So it's really important that the kids know just how much you care about them, and you really can't connect with the kids unless you know their background and where they come from. And so it's just important to talk with kids about that. How you go about that, that's everybody has their own way of doing it, but I just think it's so important that we listen to students' experiences and hear all about where they come from, and if you're invested in them, that's the only way that they're going to trust you and that they're going to listen to anything else that's coming out of your mouth.
Thank you so much. I love the idea too of just being courageous to ask. I think that's something that a lot of us struggle with is, well, what if they say no, or I barely know this person, or I might not know them at all. Why would they want to go into my classroom? So just taking that step and being courageous is a really great idea. Thank you. I'm going to pass it over to Jenny for our next question.
Thanks. So this question is for Jadyn first, and then we'll have a follow-up from Tia. How can music educators appeal to all students' interests and backgrounds, particularly in music ensembles, to ensure recruitment and retainment are effective?
So my high school is really diverse, and so is the marching band. But I feel like in order to reflect that diversity, we should play a music selection that's also diverse and could resonate with students not only in the wind ensemble or the ensembles, but also students that are in the audience. And we can do this by selecting music that can tie into cultures, and it can even tie into a history lesson behind it. And I think that's one way we can do it.
Great. Is there any particular piece, this is going to put you on the spot, Jadyn, but anything that you played in the past that you really enjoyed, that you really connected with?
I don't.
A particular style, maybe?
Jazz.
Yeah, jazz music, because our school doesn't have a jazz ensemble right now, especially with this whole coronavirus. So I really like jazz music, especially since I play alto saxophone. It's kind of a jazz instrument, so.
Great. Well, hopefully you'll get back to that soon. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How about you, Tia?
The great thing about music is it brings people together from all walks of life. And I think if we just keep that philosophy and understanding in mind, as Jadyn shared, her school is pretty diverse, and so is the audience. And so if you select music that reflect that, then you get more engagement. And as far as recruitment, if students are in the stands and see, and I'm using, marching band as an analogy, if they see their peers on the field playing and it's music that's familiar to them or a genre that's familiar, then they might be more apt to be willing to say, oh, maybe I should try to pick up an instrument. But at the same time, we also have to ensure there's a level of access that's available, and knowing the socioeconomics that vary to be able to provide those instruments as well to increase that interest. So that's just as important. And if you think about music, the use of TikTok, you know, everyone loves music in some form, right? And so if you just think that engages multiple ages, races, background, and keep that thought in mind, you probably could recruit a lot more in your classrooms.
Great. And I love the connection to social media right now, what's popular with kids, like knowing your audience, knowing what they're watching, what they're into, and then just helping your recruitment and your retention by connecting to students and having them feel like they connect as well. I know when I taught at one school, you went in the door and it had like every flag from every country. And I thought, wow, how welcoming to the student who comes into that school and says like, I can see myself here.
Yeah, that's how the atrium is at her school. They have representation of like every flag around the world. And so you're absolutely right. That definitely makes people feel more included in that home.
That's great. Thanks so much. I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
All right, this question is for Braeden, Emily, and Will. How can schools and educators have a greater awareness and understanding of diversity in their classrooms and community?
Go ahead, bud.
All right. Well, I think it's important for teachers and students, but especially teachers, to realize that some of the stuff they're saying can be hurtful to some people, even though they don't know or they don't mean it to be. Like, for example, I was learning about slavery in ELA class once, and my teacher said if it didn't end, some of us wouldn't be here, and looked at like the 3 Black students, like, it just, I talked to some of them and it didn't, none of us really liked that. And I doubt that she meant to make any of us feel bad, but some people just have to be aware that what they're saying can be like hurtful to some people.
Yeah, I mean, just to go off of that, I think that a lot of times that, like he said, people don't intentionally say things to be hurtful, but because there's a lack of exposure to diversity within the schools that are predominantly white, they're not talking about diversity either. And so there's not a whole lot of understanding about, you know, different cultures. You know, they've been asked a number of times, you know, why do people with your color skin have curly hair? Or, you know, just things that aren't necessarily appropriate, but, you know, other kids may not understand because they've never been around people of color. I mean, his school is probably 98% white. The school that he was before is 98% white. And I think it's important for them to talk about what is appropriate, you know, for different cultures.
Yeah, and from an educator's perspective, one of the things that we can do, which can be really uncomfortable for us, is to become a more well-rounded musician ourselves. You know, Emily's story about the school that we went to, when I started at that school, of course, I went to a predominantly white high school. We had a great marching band. We played all this classical music on the field. It was great fun. And so I was prepared to teach that. Well, then at that school, they had their first Black band director in the history of the school, and it was me. And they were like, hallelujah, now we get our dance band back. But the bad news is that I hadn't been trained to do that and didn't know the first thing about teaching students to do that. And so, and you know, a lot of times we categorize ourselves as educators. Oh, I'm a classical musician, or I'm a jazz musician. Well, how about we learn to do some of all of that, or encourage our students to do that? One of the things that I will never forget, my high school band director, who was a white man and one of the the most important people in my life. Without him, I don't think that I would have ever entered the field of music. He was a trumpet player, and I remember him asking me to join the marching band, which I was happy to do. And then he asked me as a tuba player to play in the jazz band. I was like, the tuba players don't play in the jazz band. but I did, and it was great fun. And here's this tuba player playing all these Barry sax parts, but I learned how to transpose. I learned how to do that transposition for Barry sax, which is an easy one, but also to engage with that style of music. So what can we do as educators to make ourselves better in all of these different realms of music, and to encourage our students, even if we can't do it, to reach out and start to engage with some other things too.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of great things we've just talked about. I want to make sure I say thank you though to Braeden for sharing that story. It takes a lot of courage to be able to talk about something like that. So thank you for sharing that with us, and both Will and Emily for your insight. Last time we talked a little bit more about diversity training for schools and educators. I'm wondering if Will or Emily, you have any insight about what you think schools should be doing, what that might look like, really any insight on that.
So when that incident happened in Braeden's classroom, we have motion censored lights, sorry. I went to the assistant principal and asked, what are we doing for diversity training? Because I was also teaching in the district, and so I knew that there was nothing happening as far as diversity training. But I think, the reason why there was nothing happening is because it was a school that was 98% white. And while it is not a comfortable conversation, for white people to always have a discussion about diversity, it has to happen, because if they don't get it from us, if we're the only ones standing in front of them, they're not going to get it. And so, when we reach the middle school age and kids still haven't been exposed to any kind of diversity, they've got a mindset and a lack of understanding. And I think that is part of what contributes to some of the hate that eventually comes out later in life. I think every school district should talk about diversity. They have homeroom. That is the perfect time to talk about cultures and diversity and how different every individual is. There's no reason to me that it shouldn't be addressed.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of times when it comes to diversity too, I was on a committee a couple of weeks ago that was charged with trying to diversify the staff here in southeastern Ohio. And people mean well, but a lot of times they're just confused about what they're being asked to do. We're talking about diversifying our staff, and it's like, well, okay, well, do we just want to hire a bunch of Black people, or just because they're Black? And it's an honest question that was asked by somebody, and the answer to that by another Black faculty member was no. But that needs to be part of the priority, and you have to be really careful, because then what are we talking about? Is that some kind of discrimination? It doesn't look like discrimination or reverse discrimination or whatever, but having a diverse faculty in that particular instance is something that we're going to value. So if you have two candidates that check most of the same boxes, and then you've got some, the other one candidate has diversity as a strength for them, then you consider that. But I think people mean well often, very often, but we just have to be reminded sometimes, and take a chance to surround ourselves with people that can speak to different experiences.
Great. Yeah, I love that it's a concept of multiple discussions. It's plural. It's not, we're going to talk about this one time and then check that box. This is something that, as you said, is ongoing. We need to constantly address and assess ourselves. So very important. Thank you so much, all three of you. I'm going to pass it over to Lori for our final question.
Thanks, Laura. And to let our panelists know, we are way ahead of time. So if you wanted to elaborate a little bit more in this next section, please feel free to do so. So for our final prepared question to our panelists, if you feel comfortable doing so, could you please share some of your experiences that would allow us to be more responsive to your needs and to create a more positive and inclusive learning environment for our students and their families? You can share your backgrounds and experiences with us. We'll start for this one with Adrian.
All right, okay. So from my experiences in high school and college, there have been a lot of things that I've seen for ways just to maybe approach some things differently. And so first thing we have to understand is that in the classroom, kids express themselves all in very, very different ways. We teachers have a mindset of, when I ask this, kids are going to respond this way. And that just may not be the way that they respond. Sometimes if we, in a classroom where everyone's supposed to be quiet and raise their hand politely, that just may not be the way that a student learns. You may ask a question and the student's so enthusiastic, they blurt out. And then you tell them, be quiet, you have lunch detention with me. What have we done? We've just shut down that child's creativity, possibly forever. And it's so important that even if that's just not the way that we teach, maybe there's a way we can meet them halfway or incorporate the way that they like to express themselves, while also teaching them that maybe not everybody would appreciate that. It's finding a balance there, and really understanding that the students have different ways of expressing themselves, and that we have to kind of meet them halfway. But we can never kill their creativity and put out their fire, no matter what. They have to keep that. The passion always has to continue to keep burning. And so I'm so glad that Will talked about this earlier, and that is the idea of repertoire selection. And as a composer, you can imagine this is a pretty big thing that I think about. And diversity of programming is so important. I can't express how important it is that we have an extremely diverse program of music on our concerts. I also can't express how important it is that we have quality music on our program, and it's such a tricky line to walk, right? Just like what was talking about. Do we select this music because it's Black? And my answer, well, I'll get into that. But I just want to, and I know we have good intentions, but I just want to make sure that we're not checking the box to fill a need I need a Black. Oh, I planned out this concert. It's perfect. Oh, let me go add a Black piece. That's not the way to approach it. So here's the way that just my general suggestions for selecting repertoire. And this could apply at college. It could apply at middle school. It could apply at high school. It could apply at anything. The very, very first thing that I look for when I'm browsing new music is I'm looking at the quality of the composition. I'm looking at musical quality. What does this piece bring to the table what does this piece bring that's new? And what does great music look like? That's a question that we all have to ask ourselves, and it's going to be a different answer for everybody, what great music looks like. But generally, if we've had great musical models, we're going to know if it's a great piece of music. And the second thing I look for is the context behind the music. Does this piece have meaning beyond just the notes on the page? Does it have a story behind it? And part of that story could also be the composer, right? So that could be part of the story as well. But we can't select the piece because it's Black without evaluating the musical quality first. So we can't get those steps mixed up. And the last thing I look for is the appropriateness, the level of appropriateness for the students. If we do this in reverse, I just don't know the kind of result we end up with. But if we start from our priority of high musical quality with a diverse program that's appropriate for my students, I think then we have a formula for success. It's important to select just great musical models for the kids, because when kids have great musical models, they want to keep playing, and they may even want to start writing music. And when they start writing music, they're going to have good examples to follow. And what is quality literature? That could be a conversation we talk about all day, but that's something that you have to decide for yourself. What is quality literature? And the last thing is in the classroom is, as a composer, one of the most important things that I think you can do for someone who's maybe even dabbling in composition and maybe just writing something is, don't be afraid to put that piece in front of your kids. Now that goes against what I just said of selecting the highest quality literature, but there's a reason for doing that. It's okay to ignore those things if there's a reason for it. And the reason for this is to encourage a young and developing voice. And whether that's your own student or not, it doesn't really matter. But you know, don't hesitate to even put a student's piece on a program. Do you realize what that would do for a kid? That would just encourage a student so much to want to continue. And if my directors didn't do that, I had a piece put on a program when I was in 7th grade. My middle school band director, Miss Cindy Stevenson, programmed that piece with the 6th grade band. And so just things like that. And my high school band director, Chris Nagy, as well, did a lot in that way as well. So that's, I think you can't do any wrong by putting a piece of music in front of your kids by developing composer as well.
Thank you, Adrian. And I can speak on Adrian's behalf because I conducted one of his pieces this past year, and it's amazing. The students loved it, Adrian. And I told them that, what are you, 20, 21? How old are you?
20.
They're like, no way, no way. They were so excited. So not even were they seeing, you know, a Black composer in front of them, but they were seeing this young composer in front of them too. And they were so excited to be like, wow, this composer is only a few years older than me, and he has a piece published already. So Adrian's music is of quality for anyone that's listening. So great. So thank you, Adrian. We're going to move on to Jadyn. Jadyn, would you like to share any of your experiences and elaborate on those?
Sure. So my sophomore year of high school, I transferred from a diverse high school to a not so very diverse high school. And with that, I wanted to continue playing music. So I stuck with being in the wind ensemble and marching band. And at the not so very diverse school, I had to deal with microaggressions and sometimes just blatant racism. And with that, it was in the band as well. And so an example would be like in my section, we had a playing test. And because I got a higher chair than the guys in my section, they would say it was because I'm Black that I got a higher chair than them, and that the director just wanted to showcase the little diversity they have to make it seem more diverse than it actually is. And so it just really hurt that they would just put that out there, and it wasn't because I actually earned that spot. And so, yeah, it's just like an example. And I feel like the teachers and the administration, they didn't really know how to like handle that because they're not a very diverse school. So they didn't really have to deal with anything like that before, like the kids that wanted to pursue college credits transferred there. So it was just kind of hard. So I guess she knows how to deal with that.
Did you share that with your mom right away, Jadyn?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Tia, did you want to roll right with that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So, you know, obviously Jadyn was very upset, and as was the director and the teacher for her class, because he didn't know that was going on behind the scenes. As I mentioned earlier, you know, you have a classroom that's large, and so it's hard to keep a purview of everything that's happening within sections. So he had no idea that dynamic was happening, and he immediately escalated to administration. But with that also came a level of accountability that kind of just, you know, fizzled away. I mean, the kids weren't held accountable as he say, she say, but at the end of the day, you have a student who doesn't feel included, who doesn't feel comfortable. And these, what we call microaggressions, these subtleties and remarks expanded beyond the band room classroom. It was whenever you saw the person in the hallway, if you saw them in, you know, and so it just got really uncomfortable despite my effort along with administration to really hold those students accountable. And I think it's because we really, although we talked about training and education, I don't think at a leadership level there has been much around how do you hold people accountable to be more diverse-minded when they're still young, growing adults at the same time, right? And so I think there is definitely a need around that. So I just really encourage teachers and educators, if you sense a dynamic in a classroom where you see someone just is like, oh, they used to be really outgoing, I noticed they're not really bonding with their section, it could be some other kind of underlying issue that you may not be aware of, and it could be very much, well, race related.
Thank you, Tia. I know when we were talking earlier in our preparation for this, you had also talked about gaining input from students to drive instruction based on their interests. You talked a little bit this at the beginning. Would you want to elaborate on that some more as well?
Yeah, I think if you're in an environment where it's not as diverse, if you showcase or, you know, ask other students input, then you you enrich everyone's perspective and you're exposing them. And so you focus on the music, you know, and that's what everyone's there for, right? It's just, you know, you want great music. And if you can just put aside those differences and focus on the music, there's a great sound that can evolve from that. So I think that's really important as well.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. All right, Braeden, would you like to share, you shared that one experience with us. Would you like to share anything else with us?
Well, my aunt is, so we were at a family gathering and I was walking around and I overheard my aunt say that I'm so tired of hearing about all this Black Lives Matter stuff. And I don't think she would have said that to my face if she knew that I heard it. But knowing that she said that kind of like, it kind of, my respect kind of went down for her a lot. Yeah.
Did you feel uncomfortable then?
Yeah.
And you don't think that she saw you though, right?
I don't think she did. I think you told her, right?
She knows now.
Yeah.
So did you share that with your parents right afterwards or immediately?
Yeah, I waited a little, but then I told them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Emily or Will, do you want to let us know how you responded?
I basically have just cut off communication to some people. And it sucks. I mean, to be blunt, that's what it has to be. But some people just have so much hate built up inside of them that you can't, they're not going to listen. And I mean, it's sad. And, but I mean, I think it's just the truth.
Yeah, you know, the other thing too, though, is that some people just have a different reality than others. You know, the town where that happened, where her family is a predominantly white town, and if you ask the majority of citizens there, they would probably tell you that there is not a problem with racism in that town. But I'm here to tell you that there is a problem with racism, but they don't know because they haven't had to engage, you know, with the other. So, you know, we just have to be more aware about the things that we do and say. And, you know, as an educator, I've been in those situations too, where I had an Asian student and I make some stupid comment about something that doesn't even apply. And you just kind of see them roll their eyes a little bit. And I'm like, oh man, that was really dumb, you know. But we also have to, you know, no matter what it is, you know, whether we're talking about Black people or Asians or Latino, you know, whatever it is, we just have to be more aware of what we say and what we do. But, you know, I have to say this, there's all this reflection and we're looking at ourselves as educators. What are we doing? And I have to say that there is a lot of what we're doing that is correct. You know, I went into a predominantly white high school in the early to mid 90s. And I was very fortunate, you know, we were probably about 30% minority. So there were enough of us that I mean, I didn't feel wasn't like the only one. I never had a Black band director, but I had in middle school and in high school and in college, those 3 band directors that I had were 3 of the most important people in my life. And it didn't have anything to do with race. They cared about me, and I knew that. And that is something, if you're a great educator, then that's something that we are always trying to do. So then what are we charging ourselves with now? Well, we still want to care about our students. We still want to understand our students and nurture our students and look out for our students. We could see, you know, if Jadyn's in my saxophone section and I can tell that there's something going on there, then I'm getting all up in that. You know, I want to see what's going on. Hey, Jadyn, what's going on there? You know, what's happening? You know, and I've had those situations in my classroom before. You know, we had a girl that was that was really odd. She would go to the bathroom every day. I don't know what was going on, but people would make, you know, and she was actually a really fine French horn player. People would make fun of her all the time. And you know, you kind of have to step up and kind of take up for your students. And so we're doing the same things that we've always done. But the one thing that my band director didn't do, that my high school band director, who was such a great person for me, is I don't think that, and I'm not down to him anyway, because believe me, he is one of the most important people in my life, but he didn't expose me to all, you know, I didn't really know that, you know, Black people could be composers or anything like that. We never talked about that. And, you know, for the majority of students, they don't think about that. They're not thinking in that type of way. They're just living life. They want to know that we care about them, but it's up to us to open the doors, to show them what's possible, because without that, they just don't know. They don't know that they can do this and they can do that, and they can, and it's okay to play piano and guitar and drums and light jazz and rock and alternative. We need to nurture that. But it can't just be, oh, you're in band, here we are, it's just band, and this is our little box, and this is our little window. It's fine, and we can still nurture students there, but what else can we show them? So I think, you know, we keep doing what we're doing in terms of how we care about our students, how we nurture our students, how we look out for our students, but then we open up a whole new world of possibilities to them, show them what's out there so that they can engage with that too.
Yeah. And he talked a little bit about this, but you know, the town I'm from, very white. If you would have asked me when I was younger if there was a race issue, I would have said no. But if you would have asked the 2 Black students who went to our school, I'm sure that they would have had a much different opinion. And I think, you know, not only as white people in general, but as educators, it's really important that we take down the blinders and be willing to listen. I think is the most important thing that we can do. We don't get to discredit anybody else's situation. You know, you need to hear what they have to say, believe what they have to say, and figure out how to respond appropriately. I think I was ignorant for a very long time, as far as, you know, some of the hate that is in our world, and because quite frankly, it's easier for us to do. But a couple years ago, I think it was 2015 or 2016, I remember sitting at home, and it was when Terrence Crutcher was killed by a police officer on the highway. I'm going to get through this without getting emotional. That's my goal. And he was in school at University of South Carolina doing his master's at the time. So he would come home on the weekends and then stay there during the week. And when we were watching the news, Braeden said, "Mom, what happens if Dad gets stopped by the police while driving home?" And, you know, for me, it was like, this is what Black people go through every day, you know, sorry. But to hear, you know, your own child with those concerns, it was a really very eye-opening moment for me. We have to do better, you know, we have to listen more, we have to be willing to hear these things. And the other thing is, as educators, we need to do the work. There are a lot of Black composers out there, believe it or not. We just don't learn about them in school, which blows my mind, you know. But we were talking one time, and he said, "Did you know that the first conductor to take an American band," is that right? Did I say that right? Yeah. Overseas to perform was a Black man. And I was like, why didn't I know that? You know, as a conductor, I should have learned that. That's a big deal. But these are things that are conveniently left out of our textbooks. And so we need to not be afraid to go outside the textbook and do the work and find the real history. I never knew that Black Wall Street was a thing. Never learned that in my history class. Why? You know, and I get angry, you know. I am really easy to get angry about it. He's not so much. And there was a time where he was walking in his tuxedo from the parking deck into the Eastman Theater, and, you know, dressed in his tuxedo, clearly looking very nice. And I guess some guys decided they wanted to harass him and use some racial slurs, and he didn't engage. And so they started to spit towards him. Well, my reaction, I am livid. I want to completely, you know, lose my mind. And I'm like, why aren't you mad? He's like, it's just another day, you know? And I'm like, that's not okay at all. So, yeah.
It's not okay, but yeah, I mean, you choose your battles. You know, the one thing that I have to say, if I don't get to say anything else, is, you know, just understand that we're going to make mistakes along the way. The conversation that we're having is good, but you're probably going to do something this year in regards to all this that you regret. And you just apologize if need be, and you move on. I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, and you just have to engage with them and go straight to it, and talk to those students, those families, and, you know, be honest about what's happened, and move and try to move forward.
Will and Emily, you were talking a lot about a situation that Jadyn, Tia, and I were in. So back in 2014, we opened the 20th middle school in our county. And, you know, there are a lot of stress and importance in starting a brand new program. And Jadyn came in as a 6th grader, you know, along with, I think in the entire ensemble, every student was a student of color except for 7 other students who were white. So it was myself and 7 white students, and a very, very diverse ensemble. And I think back, you know, was I providing Jadyn with opportunities for solos? Yes. Was I encouraging her to do private lessons? Yes. Was I placing a Black composer in front of her? No. Did I invite a guest conductor into the space that was Black? No. And at the time, you know, it was unintentional, but I wasn't, you know, thinking that. And I would check the box that, yes, I was doing this and this and that. But now reflecting back, I know better. I'm doing better now, and knowing that I didn't do that, and trying to, you know, do that in other ways. So Jadyn, to you, I say, if you were in my middle school band right now, I'm aware of that, you know, and I would be providing that. And I do that, you know, in other experiences in guest conducting or going into other people's classrooms. But, you know, it was a wake up call to me when I realized, geez, I am not providing, you know, not only my Black students, but my Asian students, my Hispanic students. I wasn't providing, you know, and my father and I, he was my high school band director, a 31-year career music educator, and we were driving to a wedding together. And I had written this article on expanding diversity on the podium, and how, you know, it was a wake-up call to me to say, Lori, you're not doing this, and here are the resources, and this is how you do it. And I said to him, Dad, you know, you started teaching back in 1971. You know, who did you program as a Black composer or a Hispanic composer? And he said, Lori, who would I have programmed at that time? Because all of the advertising that was coming out from the publishing companies, and what we learned in, you know, in our collegiate, you know, background and everything, was showing us white male composers on every advertisement, and the internet didn't exist then. So he was like, I couldn't go, you know, and explore on Facebook or the internet for other composers. So this is who I, you know, programmed. And as time went on, you know, he said, oh, I did, you know, program this person at that person. And that was only because over time, he was told by someone else, or a resource, or, you know, encouraged, like, oh, this would be a great composer. But if you think back to, you know, back in the early 1970s, who would he have programmed? Because he didn't have access to those that were, you know, for advertising and publishing companies. So Jadyn, I say to you, you know, that was, to me, I was a wake-up call, and I always, everywhere I go, say, shame on me for not doing that. But I'm thankful that I've realized that, and the resources that have become available to do that, you know. And so, Will, I can relate very much to what you were saying, you know, and so forth.
Yeah, but like even in the 90s, I mean, I'm a few years older than Adrian, 2 or 3, and those resources weren't there. I mean, we didn't have the internet then too. So people, I'm a Gen Xer, okay? So the people that are in my age range are actually kind of at a disadvantage here because, well, I mean, I'm pretty tech savvy, but the average Gen Xer is not very tech savvy necessarily. And we've been fed this diet of these white composers who are great, but there's more to be offered now. And so we especially have to really do some homework and step outside of our comfort zone to include more diverse composers.
Beyond composers, representation matters. And Adrian spoke about this earlier when you talk about mentors and people who look like you. And so, Lori, you talk about being a band director and what happened in school, but at the same time, during the solo ensemble within the county, when the girls had a duet and, they go in front of multiple judges, and over the years, there are always mostly white male judges and some white female. And for the first time, when they had a Black woman as an adjudicator, I saw like their whole body language change. They felt like someone they could relate to. I wouldn't say, it's pressure no matter what, who's in front of you for a judge, but I could definitely see the dynamic and just the energy shift, because you have someone who was very astute, high credentials, judging your work. So it's 3 Black women. And it's just a different type of dynamic. I think it really helped build their esteem and confidence just in that moment. And I just saw something very different. So I think that representation is very important, from in the classroom, guest composers, guest conductors, anyone you can bring in so people can see themselves is so important.
Absolutely. Adrian, do you want to add to that? I know you did talk a lot about that.
I think all of this is great, and it's so important. And I'm circling back around, but at a certain point, people start to check the box. We cannot make it that. It has to get to the point where it's not we're not focusing on just the color of their skin. We're focusing on how great the music is. Where we get to a point where programming a Black composer is no longer something of spectacle. We're programming a Black composer just like we're just programming any composer, right? The other thing about composing that I see is in commissions, people, and not to me particularly, but people will commission a Black composer and like, you want to write a jazz piece, or you want to write something that sounds like hip hop. I'm on this Minnesota consortium that they're putting together for 10 Black composers, and we had all started to have a conversation about this, and we came to the decision that being a Black composer, it doesn't sound like anything. You wouldn't look at any particular piece of music and you couldn't guess the color of the skin of the composer. I just find that when people ask for a certain composer to write something, they expect some particular sound. And the only thing to me what represents a Black composer is anything that I write is Black music, because I have my Black experience is unique to me, just like anybody else's. And yeah.
Thank you. Braeden and Adrian, when we were forming the brainstorming session for this, you talked a little bit about how you feel as though sometimes you don't always fit into the white or Black community. Would either of you like to expand on that? Are you comfortable doing so?
I'm happy to talk about it. I just find that sometimes the Black community doesn't necessarily see you the same way, because in their eyes, you have one white parent and one Black parent, so they just may not see you the same way. And the same thing from the white community, we face some of the same issues that the Black community has. So in some ways, it's kind of a position that leaves you very, very much feeling lonely, like you don't necessarily fit into any specific area in particular. And it's challenging. And it's not like there's a whole bunch of people to talk about it with, because there's not the same support for that. But I find that it's gotten better in these days. But it's just something to it's a complex thing that just doesn't get talked about a lot, and it is nonetheless something that's that's challenging to work through as well.
Wanna add anything to that?
I agree with Adrian. You don't, like, for me, I mostly grew up going to like mostly white schools, so that's kind of like the culture I've learned. But I feel like I've gotten pretty like used to just like mostly white schools.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, that even in the Black community, I think so often the Black community is kind of seen as monolithic, even amongst Black people, that all Black people think, you know, Joe Biden had the gaffe, you know, where he said there's not this diversity, you know, in the Black community. But sometimes even within the Black community, we expect each other to do certain things or to act a certain way. And so we, you know, your students can experience that too, being a Black student that maybe does some things that, you know, aren't perceived as Black as, you know, as other students. And you could see that dynamic play out in your classroom too. So, you know, you kind of have to be aware of that. I remember, you know, when I was in high school, being in the band wasn't the Blackest thing to do. I mean, you can imagine, I mean, we were playing classical music on the field and all this. And I mean, I didn't get harassed or anything like that, but there, you know, there are comments about the degree of Blackness of a person based on what they choose to do. So, you know, and from an educator standpoint, I know I keep going back there because that's kind of the lens, you know, that I see things through. We have to be aware of it, and just be aware that just because somebody's skin color looks a particular way, it doesn't mean that they believe a certain thing or think a certain thing, because there is diversity, Joe Biden, in the Black community.
You know, going off of what Will was saying, you know, I think that leads us to the question of what does it mean to even be Black? And every Black person is going to give you a different answer about what that means. We can't even really agree on it. And I think that every Black experience is valid, right? No one of them is better or worse than the other. And so it's just something that I think about a lot, and I try not to get too and encourage others not to get too caught up in who's more Black than that or whatnot. It's just not. It's actually taking away from what's really important.
I was just gonna add, you know, having a mixed race, well, two mixed race boys, people often say, well, they're not just Black, they're white too. Yes, you are. But at the end of the day, if when he's old enough to drive and he gets pulled over, he's not going to be seen as a white boy. I can assure you of that. And so I think that's an important thing to remember too. You know, I had a friend ask me one time, well, you had to know when you married a Black man that your children were going to have issues growing up. And I mean, I'll be honest, I think I was still so ignorant at that point that no, I didn't have any idea. The thought did not cross my mind, because it shouldn't have to be honest. But I mean, those are the things that we live with right now, unfortunately.
That thought did cross my mind, by the way.
Did you have that conversation prior to getting married, that might be the case? That would be the case, Will, as you thought?
No, I don't think so. But I mean, any children that I have, you know, we have to deal with that issue. I mean, man, we don't want our kids to have to deal with that, because it can be ugly sometimes, but it's real, and we got to figure out how to help them through that.
Panelists, we have just a few more moments left. If you want to share any more experiences with us before we move on to the question portion, if there's anything that you'd like to share with us right now that you haven't had an opportunity to do so, anyone? Or if you want to circle back on a particular topic? No? Okay, great. All right, so Ginny, I'm going to move on to you.
Thanks, Lori. Before we begin the question and answer, I just want to mention a couple things that really resonated with me. Will, you talked about reflecting and about the care that we feel for our students, and then you talked about We need to show them what's possible, and that's just such great advice. And what occurred to me is that when we're looking for ways to show kids what's possible, we open those doors for ourselves, because we have to do the research. If we don't, and you talk about not being engaged with all the knowledge and skills that we need, and you've got to be willing to put the time in to do the research. And then there's just so much that as educators we can gain from that. So thank you so much for that advice. And Jenny, I think that you probably caught on to this too, because there was a word that kept popping up today in this discussion, and it's engage. And again, Will, you talked about engaging with others, engaging with other styles, engaging with other skills. And that's just so, so important. And then finally, Adrian, I loved your comment too about inviting composers and conductors to come in. I'm both. And you're right. We love it when people call and ask us a question or something. And I hope that people will not be afraid, because how many times when you're doing something by a dead composer, would you like to be able to contact them and ask them that question, and to have people who are still living and be able to share information not only with you, but with your students too, is really, really a joy. So we have a couple questions in the chat area, and I'm going to start with the first one from Suzanne. She said she just recently read Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. I wish I could have read this decades ago when she was just beginning this research. Such a great read. If anyone has good books to suggest, please share. So if any of the panelists want to mention something, and also what we can do is, if you think of something afterwards, we can certainly make a list and share those resources with people who've joined us today too. Any of the panelists?
Well, one of the books that I'm still in the process of reading right now, but I think it's just an important book for historical sake, is A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I just think that provides such a clear, is providing for me right now such a clear overview of the past, and even some things in history that we talked about. That I'm like, why didn't we talk about this? Why didn't we talk about that? And I would strongly recommend reading that book. And it talks about the Black experience. It also talks about just a lot of other different things in history. And there's some critical parts about a lot of things, that just little details that really change a lot of different things. And I think that it'll really provide a good perspective about a lot of even the things that we're talking about now.
Yeah, I would mention too, Tears We Cannot Stop is one that I'm currently reading. It's by Michael Eric Dyson. It's a little bit from a preacher's perspective, but I mean, it's very enlightening and just really eye-opening. That How to Be an Anti-Racist is another one. I mean, fantastic readings. The more we educate ourselves, the better we will be as a society, I think, and the quicker we'll get to where we want to be.
And I think looking at the chat, we have another book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, which somebody recommended. I know that has been a real popular seller. I think at one point it was sold out on Amazon. So a lot of people are reading that. And then just going down to the next question from Amy for the panel. How do we increase opportunities to participate to minority students who may not have access to the same resources? And she feels that this is the biggest issue in getting more diversity in her groups with few role models. Anybody have?
This was a big issue for us in Asheville. In fact, a colleague of mine who will remain nameless actively recruited in a particular zip code because she knew that those kids would have the resources to be successful band students. And no surprise, then those students ended up being white students. I cannot tell you how angry I was about that. And I mean, she just kind of mentioned it in passing. I'm like, really? And you wonder why we have a diversity problem. I think you have to, one of the things that I will never forget is being in 5th grade and having the band come over to the elementary school, and they played for us and everything. I think just when you're recruiting, that you just don't make it about money. Just make it about opportunities and something that they can do, something that's going to be enjoyable for them. When I saw the band play, I was like, I'm doing that. And so how can you do that? How can you showcase that? Well, I think thinking about what you play, when you perform, and maybe how, if you can feature particular students, that, again, a diverse crowd. One of the things that I think is so important, and that Adrian has mentioned a couple of times, and this is kind of off the subject a little bit, but I just had thought about this in the process of going through that, is we want to make sure that when we give our opportunities to minority students, with the hope of encouraging multicultural and diversity, that those experiences are authentic. Like, for example, I don't want somebody to say that Jadyn got first chair alto saxophone because she's Black. I don't ever want that conversation to come up in my classroom. So we have to be about values, that we have that are going to be true. Something that they know that when she gets first chair, she earned first chair, and she happens to be Black. That's great. Okay, but we wanted to try to encourage, in terms of getting more people involved, encourage everybody to come and join us. And sometimes that means you are going to have to recruit. Instead of picking that zip code, maybe you need to recruit in another zip code and help get those kids in there. Then you got to think about instrument rental and everything. Those things are scary to parents. I remember my mom, when I joined the band, she didn't want me to do it because all she could see was dollar signs. And it was something that she was concerned about. So if we can put some of those concerns to bed, not only you're gonna encourage not only racial diversity, but also just a socioeconomic diversity, which I think is also important in what we do.
Yeah, we had a middle school feeder that he was fantastic at recruiting minority students, and part of the reason that he is because he was willing to go out into those communities and talk with the parents and talk with the students and do performances in those communities. He made it a priority, and that has to be a priority. If you want to have a band that reflects your community, then you have to make that a priority. The other thing that we always made sure to do was to build it in our budget. When we were building our budget every year, we knew that there were going to be students who did not have instrument resources or money to go on these trips, and we always made sure to find a way, whether it's via grants or fundraising, we always made sure that we built it into our budget, so that nobody was left out of those experiences.
And our kids could fill out an application, so it was completely anonymous. Nobody knew that they were asking for anything. They were able to fill those forms out, just drop them in the box, and then we could process those.
And I think that the single, and I'm done after this, I promise, the single most important thing that you can do is build relationships. You have to have strong relationships with your students, and once you do that, you're going to see it give a return in sorts. So when I have a great relationship with this class of students, and they have younger siblings, and they're going to talk to them about how impactful that class was and how, the word spreads. And, when we were in Asheville, we never really dealt with race as a family, definitely in our schools we did, but we never had to deal with issues while we were there. But I think that a big part of that was because we had those relationships in place. We established relationships within our community, because it was really evident after we moved to another community where we were brand new, that those relationships played a big role in our lives. So
I know the questions around access and resources. One thing I learned as a parent is the cost of private instruction. I think it's a lot to assume that particularly minority families can afford it. And so I would just encourage educators, and I know a lot of teachers volunteer after school and do private instruction, but you know, that needs to be more widely available at no cost or low cost, particularly for those who really want to practice the discipline more, because it can be very competitive too. And so the private instruction is a huge hurdle for a lot of parents that you really should consider from a socioeconomic perspective as well for resource and access.
And that's a thing that, again, directors can build that into their budgets as a way to help students with that. And I highly encourage it.
Yeah, and just to follow up on all of your answers that were great information for Amy's question. But I think, you know, there's all sorts of resources. If you are a Title I school, there are different sorts of, you know, funding that are available. I don't think that anyone going to their administrator in this day and age saying, I have students who are underrepresented in my program who I'd like to include. I think they'd be crazy to say, no, we can't find funds for that. And then I think, you know, anything inside the school to outside of the school through grants, through a friend of mine who works in a corporation said we had an adopt a classroom, you know, and people from a business that might have a diversity group that they're, you know, creating and talking about within their company to say, hey, we'd like to adopt, you know, a classroom or sponsor a student. And even in my experiences in high school and middle school band, we had some great instrument rental companies who would just say, you know what, we're not going to charge if it's a free and reduced lunch situation. That's what we're calling a scholarship instrument. You know, and we also had a student who I saw really great talent in at a young age, and I contacted the best clarinet teacher, Tia, when you were talking about, you know, lessons, and I said, look, this is a kid who needs lessons. He's going to go somewhere, you know, and he was first chair clarinet in the national orchestra at Disney this year. So, you know, he's going to school for music. So I think just kind of, you know, don't be afraid to reach out and ask your colleagues too, hey, I'm in a unique situation. Would you be willing to take this on?
You know, I want to add something real quickly to this. A lot, like especially at the middle school and elementary school level when kids are just learning, just starting, you know, and they don't have access to the resources for lessons, you know, it's a serious disadvantage. But something that certainly could be considered is, you know, work with the high school. Maybe some of those kids want to work with some of the middle school and elementary school kids and build community that way. It builds community across the grade levels. It builds communication across the schools, and it helps the kids. And maybe the high school kids hopefully won't be charging the professional rates, if at all. Maybe they just need teaching experience. And I know that you know, especially when I've been in high school, if someone comes and asks me a question, you know, I was always happy to help. And still am happy to help. So lots of people want to help, and high school kids, college kids even. So I just wanted to put that out there too.
We have another question here, and this one is for Jadyn and Tia. And the question is, what would have been a better way for the administration to handle the situation that you experienced with the sex fund section?
Okay, so I think simply just letting the students that said those things to me know that there are consequences for their actions, because since they're not in a very diverse school, they were able to be like openly racist and get away with it and not be held accountable. But then when like the students, it became more diverse through the Jumpstart program, they realized that they have to be held accountable for their actions, because there's other people that don't look like them there. And so I just feel like maybe like a simple like detention just to like talk about it. Like I think there should be like diversity training for kids, because like it was just, yeah.
You know, I think in a high school environment, or any school environment, you know, I know administration has to protect the kids, but, you know, from a professional standpoint, whenever there's kind of an issue or a miscommunication or anything that needs to be resolved, you bring everyone to the table. And I think it would have been helpful to have a dialogue, because there was an opportunity lost where we could have had an open conversation with the students, parents, administration, all at the table. And that would have given everyone so much more growth and exposure to a level that didn't have to be so closed. And I think that's the underlying factor right now when you think about racism we have to get uncomfortable. We have to have the conversations. And so that would have been very uncomfortable to have, but I think the result of it could have been very enlightening for everyone at the table if administration would have approached it differently, as well as parents of the students involved. I mean, so there's a lot of liability there, which I understand, but if we really want to expose our kids and have them grow into being civil and productive adults, modeling that, I think would have made such a difference.
Yeah, I was real bad for if that happened in my classroom, in addition to having those conferences, then I would have had the conversation with the band too. I did that all the time, and you know, you can see like people kind of get uncomfortable, but I don't care. I mean, that's life, and they need to understand that, and not accusatory again, but I want them to understand that my musical values are musical values. I don't care who you are. If you play better, guess who's getting the chair? So I would just want them to understand that, you know, it doesn't matter what race you are or what anything. At that point, it's about values, and that's why I said what I said. You know, that Adrian has been saying, very important that as we make the push for increased diversity, that we are also true that we're giving our kids true experiences where they earn, you know, their keep. Because you know, speaking as a Black person that has applied for jobs recently, you know, if I get a job, I want the job because I was the best person for it, not because they wanted a Black person to do it. I don't want it. I don't want the job like that. So, you know, I'll pass. I would rather, you know, get it based on the merits and the value. And if you happen to want somebody that is more diverse, hey, I could check that box too. But I don't want that. I don't want that one to be at the top of the criteria.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes, Lori? Do we have time for one more question? Okay. This is one from Jonathan, and he said, Adrian touched on this, but when potentially sharing, performing either our own compositions or students' compositions, how do we address potential cultural appropriation?
I think this is a wonderful question. I think it's a very, very tricky line to walk as composers and educators. When kids are in middle, especially middle and elementary school, when it comes to a student writing a piece, kids, if a student hears a piece in another culture and they're really inspired by it, as musicians, we imitate before we create. So if a middle school student hears this amazing piece from another culture and decides they want to write something that sounds like that, I say totally go ahead and do it. Now, do we put it on a concert? Maybe that's something we think differently about. But whatever the kid wants to write, let them explore as many different things and styles as they want to write. Now, when it comes to putting it on a concert, when it comes to things like that, I think that's a little bit different. And now, in terms of that, I think if it pays homage to the culture, and it's authentic to that culture, and it's you know, and it's not for personal gain, right? Writing a piece for personal gain to attract diversity attention, that's not okay. I think that there's, and in terms of your own compositions, and hey, maybe it's something you write, but maybe it's not something you would necessarily put on a concert. Look, there's a lot of things that I write that don't make it to the publishing stage, that don't make it to the final product. But I think that we have to encourage writing, whatever comes to mind to students. If a student writes a piece and it sounds of a certain way that maybe doesn't represent their culture, maybe it's something that you just have to. Maybe if it takes next steps, something you have to think more carefully about. But in general, I just encourage students to write, and I'd love to hear if anyone else has any thoughts on that too.
I just agree. I've had students perform. Maybe sometimes I shouldn't have, but they learn a lot by having those pieces performed, and so that's something that I did a lot when I was teaching as well.
Great. Thank you everyone so much. Tia, I want to come back a little bit. You had said about, you know, having those uncomfortable conversations. I feel like today was just that. And also a month ago in July when we had the conversation with the 4 educators, you know, particularly for those of us that are not Black, it is very uncomfortable for us to realize, geez, was I doing this? Was I not doing this? Had I thought about this? Why didn't I think about this? And I think many of us are, you know, very thankful for having all of you here and sharing your many thoughts and experiences with us. And we can be uncomfortable for a little while in the hopes that we can all be more uncomfortable down the road, be it the student, the parent, the educator, the family. So we thank all of our remarkable panelists for their honesty and guidance. And it's become a tradition here at Women Banding Together to end with a quote. And so the quote I chose to end with today is to leave you with a Maya Angelou quote that reads, "We all should know that diversity makes for a rich tapestry, and we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter what their color." We leave you with this question to ponder that we talked about at the beginning. Mirror, mirror on the wall, are we providing opportunities reflecting all students? And this came up throughout the panel today. This can be done through invitations to role models such as musicians, other educators, conductors, composers, adjudicators, speakers, and such, through traditions and backgrounds, styles of music, experiences, and more. There are numerous opportunities to include all of our students, their families. And today we did that through the lens of Black Lives Matter, and we're extremely thankful. Are we reflecting on this and implementing this into our classrooms and communities to create a more positive and inclusive learning environment? So hopefully all of our panelists have left you with these thoughts, experiences, and suggestions which will allow you to make your classroom and community more positive and more inclusive to the learning environment. I'll pass the baton back to Ginny to close our session out.
Thank you, Lori. I want to add my thanks to all the panelists. Yes, this is an uncomfortable conversation to have, but thank you for making it so much more comfortable for us. We really appreciate that. I also want to thank Lori for organizing and coordinating this panel discussion, and thank all of you who joined us for this discussion too. This session was recorded, and once it's available, we'll post a link on our Facebook page, and I'll also send out an email. All of you are on our email list now, so you'll get a copy of the link through that too. Our next event is a happy hour, which we're going to call SIP Share Support, and that's going to be on Wednesday, August 26th at a time to be determined. Please continue to like and follow our Facebook page and get other people to join us there. Let us know of anyone else who should be added to our email list. We'd be happy to include them on that. And you can also reach out to me and any of the co-founders at any time. Our links to our websites are on all of the emails that we send out to you. So thank you all once again. This has been such a pleasure to have these wonderful panelists here, and great to have everyone else join us today. Thank you.